Welcome to the Archives Without Tears Key Concepts series, Module 9, Outreach. These modules provide very brief and basic overviews of the more in-depth content available through the Pennsylvania State Archives 2 days Archives Without Tears workshops. These concepts were first compiled by the American Association for State and Local History as the Basics of Archives course. With funding from the National Historical Publications and Records Commission, the Pennsylvania State Archives adapted those principles into Archives Without Tears, or AWOT, as an in-person 2-day workshop offering practical and accessible guidance for historical records repositories. This module, Outreach, is one of 9 available key concepts overviews. In this video, we'll define outreach and its benefits for archives, historical societies, and other organizations that have historical records. Next, we'll cover the basics of outreach and how you can figure out what outreach activities are best for your organization. And then we'll look at 5 common outreach activities for archives: digitization, websites and social media, exhibits and archives tours, loans to other organizations, and outreach programs. In the last module in this series, we discussed how archives provide access to their collections by digitizing records. Outreach is kind of like an extension of providing access to your records. It's a way of expanding access beyond the researchers who are already inside your building and connecting them with more people who you wouldn't normally interact with. In short, outreach is the process of promoting greater awareness of your collections and reaching out to new audiences. Outreach is a process of identifying and providing services to communities whose needs match your organization or your archive's mission. Outreach is a tool that many archives use to connect with groups and communities or even individuals who are infrequent visitors or whose needs are underserved by their own organization. I like to think of outreach as the front porch of your archives. A front porch is the first thing people see when they come to visit you. A good porch is comfortable and a friendly place that encourages people to come inside. And outreach works the same way. It represents you in the public and helps you get involved with your community. So why should we care about outreach? Outreach, especially when it's done online or with the media, can help you reach larger audiences that you normally wouldn't interact with. Outreach is the way to let people know that your archives exists and how they can get to you. Outreach can help you promote research and the use of your collections, especially if you have new materials that aren't well known to your regular researchers. And similar to that, outreach programs can help you provide better access to your collections by making them easier to find and by pinpointing the meaningful records in those collections that others might be interested in. And for those of us who are familiar with archives, we already know that archives are important, but sometimes the general public and even our own stakeholders don't understand what archives do and why they really matter. And if those people aren't coming in and visiting us in person, these misunderstandings can spread and become an issue. With outreach, you can easily demonstrate your value. When your archives is seen as a valuable part of your community, it can open the door to partnerships, grants, record donations, and many other opportunities that might not come about otherwise. I'm going to preface this presentation with a disclaimer. Every archive has limited time and resources, and if you're going to have outreach programs, you need to fit that in with all the other work that you're doing. It's important to ensure that any outreach you do supports your mission. There are a lot of different types of outreach activities that you can do on your own. The trick is tailoring that outreach to match your resources, audience, and mission. As we talk about some of the more common types of outreach in the next few slides, ask yourself these questions to see if they're appropriate for you. Does this outreach program support and enhance your mission? Does it meet the needs of your users, visitors, and other stakeholders? Do you have the resources to do this program? Some kinds of outreach might not be the best for your archives, and that's okay. And you can always experiment to see how a program works. Sometimes it takes some trial and error to figure out what's best suited for you. To make sure that your outreach activities are cost-effective, there are a few basics that everyone can begin with. Is your archives user-friendly? Make sure that your archives, especially any public event and research spaces, are clean and pleasing to be in. And ensure that your staff are trained to interact positively with visitors and researchers to encourage them to come back again. The most basic form of outreach is making sure that your existing visitors are comfortable, informed, and have a good experience while they're in your building. Outreach should be your program's public representative or ambassador in the public. Be involved and visible in your community, and get involved in their celebrations and events. Now, community can be a lot of things. It can be the local geographic area that your archives is in, or it could be a specific group of researchers or people who are spread out but connected by related interests. Whatever your community is, try to be a part of its events, especially when they relate to your mission and your archival collections. When people know that your archives is part of their community, they're much more likely to visit and support you. Look for opportunities to write for newsletters, papers, journals, or other publications that your community reads. Outreach is most effective when you're reaching your community where it already is. And outreach isn't something that one staff person does by themselves. Work together, either between staff and volunteers who have different skills, or with other organizations and archives in your community. Combining efforts helps you all and can save resources too. Maybe your local library could provide you with event space for an exhibit or a workshop. Or maybe your staff could team up together to write blog posts about different collections that you have. Partnerships can go a long way in many different ways. And finally, learn to work with the media. Newspapers, radio, blogs, and television are all great opportunities to reach out to a much wider audience. Now, it can be intimidating working with the media if that's new for you, but the payoff is really worth it in the long run. Think about writing press releases or making press kits to share big events with the media and news from your archives. In the next couple of slides, I'm going to run through a few types of specific outreach programs that many archives use today. It's the 21st century, and these days a lot of people expect things to be available online. It's where people go to look first for information, ask questions, communicate, and look for entertainment, and archives are no exception. If you are digitizing your records and your collections, even just a tiny fraction of them, you can easily share your records with a larger audience if you have them online. When you digitize records, you can easily share them on a website, social media platform, or even send them directly to interested people through email. You're bringing the records right into your researcher's home. At the State Archives, we call these people bunny slipper researchers, people who want to do all their archival research and look at records from home, and they don't want to or they can't come into the archives in person. Digitizing your records also will free up your staff from having to retrieve the same records over and over again in the future when researchers and visitors want to see them. And as a bonus, retrieving and handling the original record less will also protect it and make it last longer as well. When somebody sees your digitized records, it's easy for them to share that digital copy with others, and also encourages them to come in and visit you in person to see the rest of your records that aren't digitized. At the State Archives, we've been really fortunate to have some of our digitized photographs and records attract the attention of the media. And when a news website uses one of our images on their page and cites us, that helps amplify access to our records in more ways than we could ever do just by ourselves. And I should also note that digitization is a little more complicated than just scanning something and throwing it up on the internet. Make sure that you're making good quality scans, especially if you want to use these images in other public programming or in publications in the future. It's best to have a standard for digitization that you use for all your scanning so that you don't have to redo anything in the future. You don't want to have to rescan a record multiple times. And for more specifics about digitizing records, check out the other module in this training series that goes over digitization in detail. And on a related note, having your own website and social media accounts are also effective outreach tools. Whether you're putting digitized records up on the internet or just using social media to share information about your archives, having an online presence will help you reach audiences that you normally wouldn't reach in person with your records, programs, and general information. There are a lot of affordable programs out there that can help you create and host websites online. And if your organization already has a website, consider working with them to create a separate page just for the archives where you can put your own information and content. Make sure that your website is easy to navigate and understand. Try to use plain language in your writing on your website so that anyone can easily read and understand it, even if they're not familiar with archives or your specific collections of materials. It's also important to put information on your website so that someone who discovers it can come and find you in person if they want to also. Think about putting driving directions, parking information, your hours, and your contact information for potential visitors to find easily. Once someone is visiting your website, you've got your foot in the door, so to speak, and having additional information at their fingertips will help encourage them even more to become a first-time or hopefully a repeat visitor. If you'd like to make a website or a social media account for your archives, but you're not sure where to start, look around and see what other archives are doing. One of the big secrets of the archives world is that we all borrow as many good ideas from each other as we can. The York County History Center is a great example. They have a Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram account, and they post different types of materials and information on each. If you decide that you want to create a social media account for your archives, make sure it's something that you and your staff have time for. It does require some time commitment to be effective. Exhibits and tours of your historical records and materials are a common and really great outreach tool too. They're easy ways to get people in your building, which encourages them to return again later. Don't underestimate the importance of letting your community see your collections up close and personal. This can be a really powerful experience for people and really encourage them to support you more in the future. Exhibits can be about pretty much anything. They can coincide with anniversaries or celebrations, or cover important topics and people that are in the news. You can exhibit specific records that you have and materials to raise awareness of some of them and encourage research in the future. Or you can have more generalized exhibits that show visitors the scope of your collections. No matter what kind of exhibit you have, make sure that when archival materials are on display, they're always secure and protected. Even though they're out of storage temporarily, items can become easily damaged while they're in an exhibit, and you should have staff keeping an eye on them as much as possible. Tours or open houses are another great way to help familiarize visitors and researchers with your archives and get them excited about returning. Think about having an open house or a behind-the-scenes tour where staff can escort visitors through your areas that are normally closed to the public. People are really interested in seeing what goes on behind the scenes in the research room, and I found that they really enjoy seeing storage areas, processing and work areas, and scanning equipment. Showing off all the hard work that goes on behind the scenes in your archives can also be an effective way to demonstrate your value to the community and other people who impact your budget. And again, make sure that any tour stops in your building are safe for visitors, and make sure that any archival materials that are near visitors are always protected. If you want to let visitors touch archival materials during a tour, just make sure that they're being supervised and that they're handling things with care, just like you'd expect a researcher to. At the State Archives, we've had a lot of success doing a combination of tour and exhibit at the same time. We'll invite a group of visitors to come over and tour our building, and we finish up with what I call a pop-up exhibit, where I take a small temporary display of archival materials and put them out in our conference room for them to look at. It's nothing fancy, it's literally just some documents and photographs that we put out on tables, and then we can put them away right after they leave. This photo that I have here on the screen is from a tour and exhibit that we did for a group of bankers that visited the archives, and we had pulled down all the banking and financial records that we could find in our collections. They were really excited, and several of these visitors actually came back as researchers. Aside from exhibits and tours, there are a lot of other events that you can participate in, both as a host in your own building and as a guest somewhere else. National History Day is a big event each year across the country, for example. Thousands of grade schoolers create history projects, and many of them will visit local historical societies and archives to do research for their project. You can reach out to local schools in your community and let them know that you can help them with their projects. National History Day is always looking for volunteers to judge projects too, and that's a good way to get involved as well. American Archives Month is every December, which is another time that a lot of archives use to host events and remind the public about their resources. The Society of American Archivists has an Archives Month website that has event ideas and information on how to participate along with other archives in your area. This is something we do at the Pennsylvania State Archives every year, and we get a really good response from our community afterwards. You could also think about hosting or giving public presentations or talks on any topics that you and your staff are knowledgeable about. Or you could invite experts to come to your archives and give talks to your visitors. If you have a researcher who's done really interesting work with your collections, think about inviting them to come back and speak about it. It's a good way to support your researchers and show other people what kinds of research and what can be learned when looking at your records. Workshops on topics like genealogy, how to take care of records and photographs, or doing specialized research on a certain topic is also a good way to engage with your community and their own specific interests. If your community is having a festival or a conference or another kind of big event, think about having a table or a booth there. You can share information about your archives and your collections and tell people how to visit you. And it's a good chance to chat with people who might never run into you otherwise. Just make sure that you clearly identify who you are and how interested people can learn more about you later on. Every year, the State Archives has a booth at the Pennsylvania Farm Show, where we do quick genealogy searches for visitors, and it's always really popular. Thousands of people will come by, and we make sure that every visitor gets a brochure with our website and information printed on it. Sometimes you might get requests from other organizations, like a library or museum, to borrow a record from your collections for their own exhibit. This can be a great way to reach new people and to support other organizations that are interested in the same history and topics as you are. When you loan archival materials out to other organizations, you'll also benefit from any publicity, media attention, and public interest that they generate. It's helpful to have a loan policy and a loan agreement form written out, and that's something that you should figure out with your organization's leadership. You might already have a loan plan in your collections policy, and if so, that's great. But if you don't, now is always a great time to start writing one for your organization. Some of the more important points to include in a loan policy are under what circumstances you will loan materials to others, deciding whether you will only loan objects to certain types of organizations like museums only or perhaps only nonprofit organizations, deciding whether you'll require organizations to insure records while they're in their care, and deciding how you will ensure that materials are safe while they're on loan. You'll need to decide will there be any fees or costs for the organization receiving the loan. You'll also need to decide how long you will allow materials to be on loan. And you have to decide which staff person in your archives will approve the loans, and who will be responsible for transporting the records to and from the other organization. Make sure that you're consistent with your loan policy so that each one is handled in the same way. And if you're not comfortable loaning out original records because of its value or its condition, you can always consider making a facsimile to use in loans and exhibits as well. And these are just some of the popular kinds of outreach activities that archives use to connect people with their collections. There are many, many other ones as well. Remember, though, that outreach works best when it's tailored to your own archives, so sometimes a little bit of experimenting can help you figure out what works best for you. So to wrap this up, let's review some of the key points that we've talked about in this module. The goal of outreach is to promote greater awareness of your records and collections and to connect them with new audiences. Remember, outreach should directly support your organization's mission and the needs of your own community. Effective outreach at its core is about providing a good experience to others. Whether you're digitizing collections, sharing information online, making exhibits, giving tours, loaning materials out to other organizations, or participating in any other kinds of outreach programs, a good experience is what will make a good impression on people and encourage them to support your archives again in the future. If you're not sure where to start with outreach, just look at what other archives are doing well, or just look at other organizations in your community and see how you can best connect with them. Outreach at its core is a social thing. It's about being a part of your community. Thank you for viewing this module of the Archives Without Tears Key Concepts series. If you have any questions or would like more information about the full Archives Without Tears workshop, please contact the Pennsylvania State Archives at ra-statearchives@pa.gov.